Have you ever, read I guess a series of books or a number of books and then, after reading them, and then reflected back on, hey, did I put any of that to use? Or did I put any of that to action? A lot of times when we think about some of the learning that we continually are doing, we have to think about we want to be learning. And I think we all enjoy learning. You're listening to a podcast right now, learning and trying to learn. But when is the right time to put that into action? And when do we think about our starts? When do we think about our ends? And what's going on in the middle? We want to think about that. And in this episode, we're going to dig into what draws you into your latest idea and what is holding you back from actually applying what you've learned.
Stick around and we'll not only share the 2 common missteps that Canadian wealth builders make along their financial freedom journey and what you can do to ensure that you don't get stuck spinning your wealth building wheels. Here we go.
Okay, Kyle. So let's unpack what we were kind of saying in the intro there, because, I know about you, but I think, one of the things I did for a long time was I would boast that, I read a book a month, or I'm reading a book every couple of weeks, and these books are nonfiction books. They're business books, or they're strategy books, or they're self-help books, stuff. Right? I for a long time, I found them enjoyable, and I found them because you would think about different things, and it stretches your mind a little bit. It makes you reflect. But I think that's the part right there. It's like, well, when do we apply that learning, and when are we applying the learning we're having, or are we just like letting it go in our brains and and out our brains? Because I think for a long time I did. I would read these things and then say, hey, I read so many books this year. I'm like, but I didn't put all the things into action, And I think that brings up some interesting questions about when is the appropriate time to put learning into action? How much learning should we really be focused on? Because I think learning can be really exciting. New ideas are really exciting. And I think when we emphasize and highlight those new ideas, it makes us want to either try those new ideas or think about those new ideas. But then sometimes I think about when do we stop trying new ideas? Even if I am reading all those books and putting those things into action, am I hurting myself by switching focuses all the time? Or I'm kind of, moving this needle and moving that needle and moving this needle, but not really focusing on what really counts. And I think, even though new beginnings and new strategies are exciting, usually the middle, the work, once you put a new strategy into place, it becomes monotonous, or the work is there and that becomes boring.
Yeah.
And I think that influence us to pick up the next book and find the next idea. So I've changed in a way lately, and I want to unpack that with you here today, is because I feel like I'm reading less books, but trying to make those books more impactful for the work that we're trying to do.
I love it. And I think back to the book, Power of Moments by the Heath brothers.
Uh-huh.
And in that book, they highlight how moments that you remember are most often starts and ends, So you think about, New Year's, it's the end of a year. It becomes a special moment, or the end of a season, or the beginning of a season, and when we talk about these things, whether it's, sports, whether it's a business, whether it's something in your family, these are things that stick out because, as you mentioned, they're exciting, right? They give you that little boost of energy. They get you motivated. And, when we think about this from an investment side of things, and I always also think those who are incorporated business owners, your business is an investment also, right? So I'm kind of clumping these things together. We find that what ends up happening is, you get business ideas and people want to start a business. It's funny because out of all of the businesses out there, the vast majority of them actually don't last longer than a year. Right. And I mean, that tells you something. It's probably less about the person who's running the business, or it's maybe even less about the business idea. It's about sticking to it. Right. It's about, that middle part that you're referencing. It gets really excited. The first thing I hear people say when they want to start a new business idea is they're like, what do I need to do to get incorporated? What do I need to do to register the business name? What do I need to do to get a domain name for the business, on my website? Those are all the exciting things, because you're like,
it's all new.
It's all new. I have a business now. And the same is true when we look at the wealth building game, right? We think about all of the different ways that we might be able to, because again, building a business is a way to build income, build wealth. Actually having investments, whether they're passive or active investments, is exciting because it's something new. And you're like sort of thinking about like, wow, if I only applied this strategy, things would be great. But then that beginning phase sort of like fades a little
it
bit,
becomes
right?
boring.
It becomes boring. And you know what? And it's like the implementation where, John, it's funny because you're the implementer on our team. I'm the guy that gets excited.
You're the big thinker.
I'm the big thinker.
The dreamer.
I love doing the learning. But, without you, I would probably be flailing around, and I still do. I still find myself, finding new ideas. I'm a fact finder. I love learning about all of these things. But the key is being aware that while learning is great and we're not discouraging people from continuing to learn, one of the biggest hiccups is and this is the misstep that we all have. It's almost like, when we hop from idea to idea, but we actually don't implement anything. And therefore we're kind of sitting still. Like we might have this wealth of knowledge, right? We have this idea of like passive investing or real estate investing or private placements or options trading or, starting a new business, whatever it is that we're doing. The problem is that, you all of a sudden get this new idea, it becomes exciting, and you think if I only did that, then things would be better. But the problem is you continue to hop around going, well, if I only did this, if I only did that. And then at the end of it, you go, oh, shoot, if I only did that and I've done nothing. And therefore, I've wasted a ton of time not allowing the most important piece to take place, which is compounding. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And this is one of those pieces. So today we want to unpack a little bit about those missteps. So again, the starting is great. The other one's the ending. When we talk about common missteps, it's about the ending. Like when I get to X, Y, or Z, it's going to be exciting because I'm going to sell Bitcoin for $1 million, or I'm going to sell my business for X number of $1 million. But once again, it's like that middle part. If we don't do all of that work, we don't get to that end point. So that first misstep is going to be, it's almost like distraction, overwhelm, maybe analysis paralysis. But then the second misstep is sort of like not actually doing the work to get you to that eventual exciting point, which is, I'm going to summarize it all in financial freedom, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I think a key phrase for me for the last couple of years has, and I'm not sure exactly where I heard it because I didn't state this, but it makes a lot of sense, which is patience is like the definition of patience is figuring out what to do in the meantime. Like when you settle on this is a great strategy to try and it becomes exciting, what happens is, like you said, is it becomes a little bit monotonous or boring when the details are worked out. And now it just means like us sticking to the plan. And let's say it's a portfolio investment strategy where you do a lot of research and you're like, oh, I'm going to take this ETF strategy. I'm going to be investing in these. And then all of a sudden now the learning is over. And usually you want to fill that timing. So you start learning new things, but then the learning is over and now the application has started. So now the sticking to the plan is there, where maybe it's you investing a blank amount of money every single month because you're doing a dollar cost averaging, or maybe you're trading on a regular basis. And now it's become monotonous because you're looking at, say, key levels and you're making moves on this day and that day. Or maybe you stick to a plan where you're only doing it every single week or every single month, or maybe it's once a year you're rebalancing. So it becomes sometimes, especially if you're in that mode of learning something new and then putting that new thing into action, what happens is because the monotonous of the actual action isn't exciting anymore, your tendency is to switch. Your tendency is, because you're now filling your time with the next new thing or the next book or the next new idea or the next portfolio strategy, is you aren't giving that compounding effect, the compounding period, enough time. If like all of a sudden, if it is a portfolio strategy, we're like, I'm going to try this new idea because I've spent 6 months doing this. And I'm like, oh, I'm not sure if it's like working, but the working is the length and the working is the time. The working is like the waiting period of like letting it work. And you're like, oh, I'm missing out on the boat here if I don't apply this new strategy. Oh, I've learned about options, but I want to put those option strategies into play because I just learned about them. But then you switch focuses, and the switching of the focuses interrupts your compounding period. So, you want to make that learning happen. It's exciting for you, but you have to realize, and I think that's the biggest, one of the biggest recommendations that we've had and we want to pass on to you is just being aware that learning is that learning cycle of learning, applying, and then learning something new and then switching focuses is there. And it's a draw by recognizing it, because this is a conversation you and I have regularly about, should we switch focuses at this point, or should we pivot at this point, or should we introduce systematically the changes we want to see in this new strategy compared to like doing what we said we would do, like because we are big thinkers and because we also focus on getting, worrying about what's happening when we're waiting for the next thing to happen, like patience, then we want to make sure like we're balancing that well. But I think the first recommendation around kind of what you want to do is just be aware that it's enticing to make the switch. What you want to do is just, the awareness will help you go, no, I said I was going to stick to it. I said I was going to give it this length of time. And maybe, and this is maybe my recommendation, is maybe you have built into your plan, and this can be a consistent plan moving forward, is that, let's say, and I'm going to make up a number here because I just don't want to give you any sort of numbers that you're going to be like, John said I should be looking at, this much of my portfolio.
Fault, John. Yeah.
Right. But like the way I like it is create a chunk. If we are talking investment strategy, then, and this could be a business strategy too, right? It could be in business. It's like, I'm going to switch focuses from goals. I'm working on this goal in business, but then I'm going to switch goals. It's like the switching again causes the interruption of the compounding you were expecting to happen in your business. Could be in life. It doesn't matter. But if you think about whatever domain you're thinking about right now, then maybe there's a small chunk of that time, of that focus, of that portfolio that is earmarked as experimental, or kind of in the education world, we used to call it genius time. It was like this time where we're like, this is the time and the flexibility we give ourselves to learn new things and to try new things without switching the main focus we said was important. And then, like, let's say it's 5%, let's say it's 10%, let's say it's 2%. It doesn't matter. You pick. But then maybe that plan is, over time, you're like, okay, I'm going to develop a rule-based system that says I'm going to implement, if my genius time or my experimental component starts to prove successful and I have consistent results there, maybe I have a rule where I slowly increment and switch over those things into the main portfolio or the main work. In the business world, people do this by quarters, right? Like, what's the goal for the quarter? What's the goal for the year? What's our 3-year goal? What's our 5-year goal? Like, that gives you opportunity to switch focuses per quarter. In the investment world, you might want to stretch that out, or you might want to shorten it. But depending is, give yourself kind of those leeways to go, I'm going to slowly switch some focuses based off new learning, but I'm not going to do an all shift one way or the other, right? But so the big recommendation here is understand that this is a reality. And especially you listening to a podcast right now, you're probably like us, who learn a lot of things and want to apply those things. But then know, what's the system you're building? We've talked about that in previous episodes. Like, you don't rise to your goals, you fall to your systems. Like, what's the system you're building to slowly work those into your main portfolio, or just keep it as experimental, but have that system.
Right. And, something you said there, which I think is really important, is in order for you to do this 20% time, 10% time, whatever the number is that you're recommending, there has to be something happening in the meantime. So what I think is really key here, and you're saying it, this is impossible to happen if you don't do this, but I want to make it very explicit, is that there has to be something already happening while you're doing this learning. So what I worry for many clients is that oftentimes it's almost like they're like, I'm just going to wait until I'm done the learning. And that is a really, really tough move, because what you're suggesting is, it's almost like you're going to sit with, I always call it the cash under the corporate mattress, or the cash under your own mattress at home, and wait until you know enough and you have the right strategy, the perfect strategy to get in. So the real question is like, what's happening in the meantime? What is what I'll call the most basic level of investing that you could be doing? And for everyone, that's different. For me, it's real estate. Like, I do that and I feel confident in that. So I continue to invest in real estate in the meantime, while I'm doing some of this learning, some of this 10, 20% time over here. And I don't just, completely eject on real estate because I want to add another strategy to my portfolio, right? For someone else, that might be mutual funds at the big bank, right? You're like, I don't want to do it. I know that people tell me that, the fees are high or the this and that and all of these things. It's like, guess what? You need to be doing something in the meantime, because that learning time you're taking, that is compounding time. That is time that your assets as of today could be doing something. Now, I don't want you to blindly take all of that cash that you're sitting on and throw it into the stock market, but you should be analyzing and thinking like, what's my lowest level of entry here that I can be in something that matches my risk tolerance and my risk capacity. You heard John DeGuy when he was on the episode. I love the sort of framing of this idea is that not only do you have to sleep at night, right? Your risk tolerance, you also have risk capacity. Like, you can't follow this advice I'm giving you right now. Remember, it's not advice. You can't follow this idea and just take all this money and throw it into something randomly, because you might not have the risk capacity, meaning you might need that money soon. If you need that money soon, you can't just take it and throw it into real estate. That's a bad move. Or you can't just throw it into equities. So you have to be calculated in doing this. But what do you know best now? Making sure that something is happening there. And whether it's 80% of it or 70% or whatever that number is, whatever that strategy is, you need to be doing that in the meantime. And you can always get better and better at it. And guess what? Unless you're already, say, retired and living on passive income, you're going to make more money every month doing whatever it is you do in your business, your T4 job, whatever it is, and you can continue to contribute. And that might mean that these other ideas start to become bigger parts of your investment portfolio, right? It becomes a bigger part of your asset allocation. But what we don't want to see happening is people sort of like staying and waiting for, the answer to arrive, because that is definitely a problem. And, the piece that I think is really important for people to be thinking more about, the reason you're intrigued in investing and wealth building to do this learning is usually you're drawn to greater reward, right? You're drawn to greater return. With that comes oftentimes more risk. We believe the more you understand, the less risky something becomes, but it doesn't completely eliminate risk, right? Anything can happen. The problem is that a lot of people are so excited at that return, they're excited at that reward, and they want to earn X number of percent in return, when in many cases that actually isn't super realistic, whatever that number is. For example, we've used the S&P 500 in a lot of examples. Like, if you did investments over a 20 plus year period, really, if we looked at all 20-year periods, you're only looking at somewhere around 8%, a little higher than 8%. If we look at the entire process, or the entire time the S&P has been around, it's been more like 10%. But guess what? Very few people have actually achieved that. Why? Because they're not in for the whole time, right? And, sometimes they're in and they're out. Sometimes when markets dip really hard, they wait for the worst moment, and then they pull it all out on the sideline. They wait for the rip to come back, and then they put the money in. So the reality is that a lot of the things that we're expecting in terms of returns are actually holding us back from doing the thing that's going to be most helpful to you, which is getting it working, getting it compounding. So what is that foundational case for your money, so that you can at least get yourself to a place where you are confident that if you stuck on this path, right? If I stick on this path and this path alone, that I will at least have a base case for my financial freedom numbers that I'm after. And then any additional investments that we're making, anything above that base case that's more conservative, less volatile, whatever you choose for that asset, now you can start focusing on this 10, 20% time to start going, okay, where is a little bit of this risk on going to go? And I can slowly move the needle. I can slowly move the dial on it. But here's the part that's really sad, is that for many people, it's a hop from one to the next, and none of that extra sort of risk on investing takes place. It's not an either or. We can't be high risk and no low risk. Like, you got to make sure that you take care of this foundational base, And then you can start
Love it.
exploring some of these more risk on ideas and experiments and so forth. Keep yourself engaged and potentially give you some of that extra, what we like to call as gravy on top of your plan.
I think the secret sauce I want you to remember, is that the learning you're trying to do and the learning you like to do, it's on a sliding scale. It's on a continuum with the application and which means also the waiting time, the actual work in the middle of what's happening in the meantime. And the more learning you do, the more you want to apply. But the less learning you do, usually the less time, the less new things you have to actually make applications on or put into action. So, but you want to have that sliding scale because we all want to learn things and we all want to make sure that we're not missing, say, a key strategy or making sure that we can get some gains. But that sliding scale is that part where we figure out what is the base case, what is our foundation versus our experimental or our 10%, 20%, 2% time. Like that's the big kind of secret sauce here is that you have a sliding scale between application and the waiting time and learning. And you just have to find the right mix for you and feel comfortable with it. But it's definitely something we do have to think about. Otherwise, we are doing what Kyle just said. We're hopping around and we're not letting compound take its effect.
So, my friends, if you are looking for a little bit of extra guidance, a perspective, some ideas based on your specific scenario, should reach out to us over at CanadianWealthSecrets.com/discovery. And you can go through, figure out what phase in the journey you are in. You'll get that immediately by running a quick little survey, but then you'll also have an opportunity to book a call, a free discovery call. We'll work with you, try to give you a next best step in your journey over at CanadianWealthSecrets.com/discovery. And of course, if you're an incorporated business owner and you've been earning that active income and those retained earnings are starting to pile up and you're starting to wonder, why did I incorporate in order to save taxes? It feels like I'm going to get punished here. Let us lead you down that path so you can understand how you can make the most of those retained earnings. This would be some great 20% time for our incorporated business owners by heading over to CanadianWealthSecrets.com/masterclass, and you can hop into our free self-paced masterclass today. Again, CanadianWealthSecrets.com/masterclass.
All right, Canadian Wealth Secret Seekers. We'll see you next time.